We need more Christians evaluating why they work at a place. And it's not just to make money to give to missionaries. Because if the Great Mandate is a real thing, if we see work as it's something that was instituted before the fall, then we see this as an act of spiritual formation. And so it is a responsibility for us to use those resources, those times, for the flourishing of other people.
You're listening to the Faith and Work Podcast, where we explore ways to serve God and others in our daily work to bring life and hope to workplaces and cities.
Welcome to the Faith and Work Podcast. I'm Ross Chapman, your host for today, and I serve as the CEO at Denver Institute for Faith and Work. We are in the middle of a two-part series about questions. So this episode that you're about to hear actually pairs really nicely with Becoming a Questionable Worker, a conversation that I got to have with J.R. Briggs, where we focus on personal leadership and learning just to ask better questions, modeled after Jesus, who asked hundreds and hundreds of questions in the New Testament. And in this episode today, we have some awesome guests that are going to help us wrestle with questions that every generation of Christians has had to wrestle with, which is something like this. What does it mean to build something good or to do good culture inside a system that runs on very different values? And we're going to hear this conversation around good culture in an empire. And we're excited with our guests today because they come to us not just as thinkers, but as artists. They do music, theology, history, cultural critique. And I think it's going to be a really fun conversation for you to listen in on. And as you do, I want you to listen in with an open mind. Maybe they'll ask some questions that you hadn't considered before, or maybe frame the way we do things as something that you hadn't heard before as well. And so go along on this journey with us. It's going to be worth the trip. So let me introduce our guests. Our first guest is Baraka. He travels the world as an artist, performer, a consultant, a lecturer. He has 4 solo albums, 3 feature film appearances, and a book, which is called He Saw That It Was Good. Sho is a co-founder of the AND campaign. He has also been a visiting professor at Wake Forest University and Warner Pacific University. He is currently serving as the editorial director of the Big Tent Initiative at Christianity Today, and he lives in Atlanta, Georgia, with his wife and 3 children. Malcolm Foley is our other guest. He has his PhD from Baylor University. He's a pastor, a historian, and a speaker, and he is currently serving as a special advisor to the president for campus engagement at Baylor. He's written for Christianity Today, The Anxious Bench, and Mere Orthodoxy. In his recent book, The Anti-Greed Gospel, Why the Love of Money is the Root of Racism and How the Church Can Create a New Way Forward, it really guides people to just resist a racialized capitalism. And so Malcolm's book sets the stage for this conversation, and Sho is an incredible guide as well. We are so excited to have them on the show. Sho and Malcolm, welcome to the Faith and Work Podcast. All right, so the theme of good culture in an empire is what we're kind of talking about today. And before we get to what you guys mean by good culture, I'd love to hear you help us understand what you mean by empire. Define what we're actually talking about when we are hearing you guys talk about empire.
I guess I can start.
Thanks, Malcolm.
I'll do it. I'll do it.
Let Sho think about it for a second.
I'll hit it at 2 levels. So
Malcolm leads his own empire, so he knows well.
Yeah.
Perfect.
So cosmically, I think about it in terms of the Book of Revelation. So when John is writing to the 7 churches, they are literally dealing with the Roman Empire. But one of the messages of that book is also, hey, things, even though you're experiencing persecution, things are actually worse than they appear, because you've actually got demonic powers that are operating behind the empire. And even the language of beasts that shows up in Revelation is the same language in Daniel. And beasts are always states. And so state power is one of these things that functions in many ways as an evil in a lot of the scriptures. But for us here, especially in this country, I mean, this country does function as an empire. But also, one of the things that I want to press is that our political economy is imperial. So in thinking about the way that racialized capitalism functions, the violence of it, the exploitation of it, and the lies that lie at its root those are the primary tools of empire. And those are also what the three beasts in Revelation 13 represent. In thinking about the dragon, the beast from the earth, and the beast from the sea, you're looking at the devil, you're looking at the demonized state, and the propaganda machine, all of which are necessary for these systems to work. And so when I think empire, I think about the interplay of those three things, of the interplay of propaganda or lies, violence, and economic exploitation especially.
Does that connect with the Exodus description of Egypt?
Yes. Egypt functions in the same way too. I mean, I think it's just, these are also just kind of the main ways that the devil likes to work in the world. And so when you see that at scale, you see empire. But then contrary to that, when we think about the people of God and the people whom God forms, especially in the Exodus, it is specifically a people that is supposed to be organized in such a way that undermines empire at every step. And so I think that's also important for us to remember about the way that we think about ourselves as church as well.
I like how you're talking. It reminds me of Brueggemann, The Prophetic Imagination. Sho, what would you add? Would you have anything else to add to this idea of empire?
No, I just think the only thing I would add is I think in the New Testament we see a few more elements outside of the state, outside of Satan. You see, I would specifically talk about how mammon plays a role in how the state and how our idea of empire functions. But I would also say there's a spiritual component of death and how death is an integral part of the empire in a sense of not just its ultimate threat is to lead people towards not only just like economic, emotional, but like physical death.
Yep.
Like death.
Yep.
It's one of the tools in which it uses to keep order and to keep air quotes civilization going. And I think these are the antithesis of what Jesus is. Jesus is talking about life, freedom. He's talking about love. There's solidarity, and he talks about the racialized capitalism, or just the economic structures of which we exist are inherently built and structured so that it creates divide, it creates competition, it creates a lack of solidarity. Now, people can do good within these systems, but
we'll get to that later.
Yeah. So anyway, yeah, I would say if we can think about the deceiver, we can think about mammon, we think about death. I think that should be included as well as how we view the empire.
That's great. Well, I'd like to ask both of you, Malcolm, pastor, theologian, Sho, you're doing work with Christianity Today.
I was like, not a theologian. You're just a guy.
You're just a guy here talking. We're so glad you're here. Help.
Hanging out.
That's right. Well, I was thinking about the Black church and its experience in an empire, and would love to just learn from you guys and your perspective on like how can the Black church help all Christians in an empire have a faithful witness or navigate being made a commodity or just treated awfully, like however we would frame that. What is the wisdom that we should be listening to?
So let me first say that I do not like to try to speak as an authority on the Black church. But I will say this, I do think there are some wonderful examples of how the birth of the Black church and its whole purpose, in a sense, as Malcolm he's done PhD work on this, is the racialized violence that created the even need for a Black church in itself is a testament to what it can be and how it can be a testimony against the empire. I think the act of being, you talk about Brueggemann, this idea of resistance and hope, because I think most people just want resistance or some people just want hope. And I think the tethering of those two things together is what makes the prophetic imagination of the Black church something that's really spectacular. And so you have all of that. I mean, there's way more. I think there are great examples. The one fault, I think, and this is the subtlety of what the empire does, is that you look at the problem and you think the entity that creates the problem is also the solution. And so I do think in some ways the Black church, like many institutions and many entities, they assume that the way in which we will get out of this is by asking the empire to intervene on our behalf. And I think, if anything, to me, Jesus has shown us an example of how to resist and not reform the empire. It's not better inclusion into the empire because we're indoctrinated in ways. So when you talk about Exodus, I think there's some wonderful theology praxis where it's like you're to leave things behind. Don't bring these things with you. And so, I would say it's the Black church, but even individuals, the creative endurance that we get from spirituals, we get from music, from literature, art. I think all of that is a wonderful example. But I will say, I think what's the Black church has to wrestle with today and historically is in its advocating for a more equitable space, have we allowed the empire to inform the things we need and how we should live? And I think that is a
good question.
And that is in many ways an exegesis of when Jesus says that his kingdom is not of this world. Like he's saying that it's not from here, and it doesn't operate in the way that this operates. And we really, as the people of God, we really need to take that seriously, because it's really easy when everything around us tells us, no, like this is the way that power is supposed to function. This is the way that we're supposed to think about our resources and all those kinds of things. And then the Lord comes in with something like the incarnation, where God communicates, no, actually, the primary way that you should think about your resources is how to share them. Because when I think about my own divinity, I function as an eternally self-giving being. Yeah. And when the Son expresses himself in the incarnation, it's that the Son takes on flesh in order to share everything that he has with us. Mm-hmm. If that's the way that Christ operates with everything that he has, and we're united to that same Christ, that also ought to shape the way that we think about our resources or any other gift that the Lord has given us.
I think there's a good example of, to make an amalgamation of the Black church, the Quakers, and the Amish is a wonderful kind of
I like this
example of what I think could be, or what a church could be within the empire.
You need to say more.
Well, I just think, I mean, this is me being a little
This is a show's thing right now.
I think the empire does a wonderful job of making us feel like we need its resources and its help in order to thrive. Like, I can't remember, I think it's, I forget the political theorist's name, but it's like when you invent the car, you also invent the car crash.
Yes.
And so...
Or the ship and the shipwreck. I just heard that recently.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so... But then we think, oh, they're being innovative because they created seatbelts, so now we're safe. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Oh, but then they give us tickets for speeding to keep us... Well, what the empire is doing is still working through profit, and it's still thinking about production, and in some cases you can say even greed. But then the real social theory, like... The controversial question is, do we ever need a car? You know what I mean? Like, did we ever really need it? Mm-hmm. It's made our lives convenient. So that's just a theoretical example. But I think there's a lot of examples of why do we do this in the church? Why do we operate this way? Do we really need this? Because it's compounded other things, and so it's taken us so far away from like baseline that I think at some point we got to evaluate and say, how do we get here?
Yeah.
How do we get to this place? Mm-hmm. And a lot of it has been the attempt to reform the empire. And I don't think Jesus or the New Testament ever calls us to reform the empire. It tells us to resist. And a lot of that resisting is to be a peculiar people on the margins. But that is too difficult to do. And I'm not even saying that like to be funny. Like,
yeah, it's just hard.
That is a very difficult thing to do, especially in 2026. It's nearly impossible to live in the margins. That's why I say Black church, Quaker, Amish. If you can take a little bit of all that, I think you have a wonderful example of a healthy church that can live a resisting church on the margins.
Let's go back to the incarnation. So Jesus comes from outside what he's made to live inside it. But to embody a new kingdom, a new empire. And he lives within, but somehow different. He lives in Babylon, but Babylon doesn't live in him. Yep. So, we're talking about this on the Faith and Work podcast.
Yeah.
So let's narrow in on how people are actually living and working.
Yeah.
Hopefully in Babylon, but not out of a place that Babylon's in their heart.
Yeah.
So I think, creating good culture, creating beauty. You guys, I'd love for you to talk about that. But then also try to apply it to somebody who's in a sales job.
Yeah.
Somebody who's going to be sitting in a budget meeting. Somebody who's going to be on the line making cars.
Yeah.
We just said, do we even need cars? So just help us experience that a bit more practically. What would these big questions that are important and framing and are not often asked enough. But then how do we then live?
I'll hit this.
Right there.
There's a big. I'll hit it also at a big level. One of the primary ways that our political economy disciplines us is through fear. Capitalism disciplines us through fear. And so we work because if we don't, we die. Like, that's how it works. And so many of us remain in exploitative jobs or jobs that kind of actively harm us because in our minds we're like, if I don't do this, I die. But what we do when we do that is we also deny Christ's words in the Sermon on the Mount. And this is exactly why Jesus says in Matthew 6:24, you can't serve two masters. You'll either love one and hate the other, or be devoted to one and despise the other. You can't serve both God and mammon, where mammon is the Aramaic word for money or riches. And then immediately after that, he says, therefore, do not be anxious about your life, what you'll eat or what you'll drink, or about your body, what you'll wear. Isn't your life more than food and drink, and your body more than clothing? Because one of the things that he's indicating there is that one of the primary ways that mammon operates is through fear. Is to get you to think that the only way that you survive is if you serve mammon. And so the temptation on a day-to-day basis is going to be for you to think in your job, the primary thing I need to be thinking about is how do I do my job well so that I can survive? No, the question is, how do I serve the Lord in this space? That's because, and in the event that it becomes impossible for me to serve the Lord in this space, I go to the Lord and be like, okay, where are you going to take me? Because clearly you're going to take me somewhere else. But most of us are kind of unwilling to ask those kinds of questions because our base assumption is, I need this job to live. No. You need the Lord to live. The fact that thought process is so common for us, I think indicates how insidious Mammon's tendrils are. Because that's how it works. But that's just one element.
Hey, I'm Luke.
And I'm Samantha.
And we're donors to Denver Institute for Faith and Work.
As entrepreneurs, our work can often feel all-consuming. The Denver Institute for Faith and Work has helped us to think both critically and theologically about how our business is impacting our workers and the communities we are a part of.
As Denver Institute pursues its mission to prepare people to serve God and others through their daily work, we look forward to the impact it'll have. This can't happen without the support of this community. If you've been encouraged by this conversation, or if your life has been shaped by Denver Institute, we encourage you to join us in giving to this mission.
To learn more or to make a financial gift, please visit the Give page at denverinstitute.org.
First of all, thank you for this question, because I've existed in the faith workspace for a while now, and some of the critiques I'm sure that I will mention are not new to you and the people, but it is oftentimes elitist. It oftentimes doesn't think, you talked about this off air, it doesn't think about the people who do not have the opportunity to choose their vocation. Yeah. More than not, people are working for survival. And so what does that mean for the Christian? I don't think it changes much of the way we work, Colossians, whatever we do, we're doing it as unto the Lord. But I also think if we have the ability to be more of sound mind and not be led by fear, I think we need to be asking the Lord, why am I working this job? Or where should you be leading me towards? And calling can be more led by need than by skill. Mm-hmm. Oftentimes see in the scripture that very few people are called according to their skill. Yeah. Many more people are called according to a need or to suffer, if you will. Yeah. I remember last time I said that you had a different term. Yeah. I don't know if you changed it. But there's this idea that we can negotiate with God. And because we live in a wealthy nation, we have that luxury to negotiate with God. And granted, I've taken advantage of this luxury, and I'm not trying to be pejorative anyway, but I think that's the reality of existing in an empire where you have options, but you don't understand you're swimming like a fish. You're in the water, and you don't know you're operating in the water. And we play God. And so anyway, so the very practical thing is one of my favorite quotes from a book called The Prophet, Khalil Gibran. He says that work is love made visible. Mm-hmm. So if you are an individual who are all of the different descriptions you gave me, I don't believe work is agnostic. You're either working for somebody's kingdom. Mm-hmm. And so I think we have to evaluate, why am I swinging this hammer? Yeah. And so am I swinging it to make love visible through these particular actions? If not, then you probably need to leave that job. We need more Christians evaluating why they work at a place. And it's not just to make money to give to missionaries. Yeah. Because if the great mandate is a real thing, if we see work as it's something that was instituted before the fall, then we see this as an act of spiritual formation. Mm-hmm. And so absolutely. It is a responsibility for us to use those resources, those times, for the flourishing of other people. And if all you're doing is just for your own pocketbooks, then I guess you could say we believe in a slumlord.
That's right. Yeah. Well, we like to talk about work being a place of formation. Yeah. It's an arena for your own growth to be more like Christ.
Amen.
And if you don't have that perspective, change your paradigm, because God wants to use it.
Yeah.
But it's also an arena for mission, and what does that look like? I think in the context of what you guys are saying about empire, it is, how do you embody a new way of living under a different empire in an empire that's passing away? And if you're working for Babylon, but you're meant for New Jerusalem, you're adding to the empire of Babylon. And I think it doesn't matter your job. You should be asking these questions.
Yeah.
And sometimes I would, what you're saying just about the privilege that many people have in our current world country to choose their work is a anomaly in history. Yeah. It's a privilege we should recognize and appreciate, and also recognize that not everybody can do that in our country.
Yeah. Also recognize and seeing how it's warped our faith as well.
Yeah, absolutely. From my perspective, Scripture gives us two cities. You're either working for Babylon or you're working for New Jerusalem. And I think it doesn't matter what your work is. If you're asking those kind of questions, you kind of get to the other ones, like, how should I show up in this space? How should I love people? I don't love this job for my skill set or my passions, but I love that I get a chance to support my family, provide for myself, serve my neighbor in some way, be in it with my coworker. Those kinds of opportunities are present in our workplaces. Let me ask you guys this: how do you hold lament and hope together without one swallowing the other?
My mom passed away a year ago this last week. Henry Nouwen talks about joy and suffering not being two attributes that are in conflict with one another, but that they can exist at the same time. But I think that's so difficult to actually realize in life. I think there are times when you feel like you're like, this sucks.
Yeah.
But I don't think, from my own personal exegesis in life, I don't think that means that I'm not hopeful. Yeah. It's just an acknowledgement that we are meant, talking about fear or the way like death, like we're not made for that. And in a lot of ways, when it becomes unhealthy, that unhealthy lament is leading me towards a fear that is fracturing my relationship with the Lord, which is the hope that we're. And so,
right.
I guess you try to allow room for it. If anything, I would say this: I think churches need to allow for more spaces for us to practice doubt, for us to practice lament, because when we practice it in isolation, and then we try to bring it to the corporate space, and people are trying to fix you. Then it's like, well, you know what? This is not a safe space. And then you end up going somewhere else. And then eventually you probably just allow that doubt or that lament to consume you, and you end up leaving the faith. So if we had more, I guess, liturgy and more practice in our church where we could just have lament sessions, I don't know. I think it'll help for us to feel the present hope that we exist in without us feeling like lament is is only for unbelief, or doubt is only for
Right.
unbelievers.
Well,
It's
yeah,
for the Christian.
yeah. Well, lament in community is much more hopeful than
Yes.
lament alone.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. What do you think, Malcolm?
In Hebrews 12:2, we are told we're told to fix our eyes on Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of our faith, who, for the joy that was set before him, endured the cross, despising the shame, and now sits at the right hand of the Father. What that indicates to me, especially with a reference to Jesus as the pioneer and perfecter of the faith, saying that he's first, also the one who perfects this faith, which also means if he's the first, then there are other people who have to come after him. What that also indicates is that there are other people who have crosses that they have to endure and shame that they have to despise in light of the joy that is set before them. So one of the issues that we have, and this is what my second book is about,
All right.
and it's that our hope is too small, which is why we're not willing to suffer. What this means is we don't lament enough and we don't hope enough. And the fact of the matter is that, I really think if we really deeply understood the things that Christ and the apostles tell us about our future, that is what God is preparing us for, what it actually looks like to participate in the divine life, which is something that we are all invited into, regardless of our job, that what God is setting you up for is the divine life. Okay, if that's true, then the cross that he has called us to bear, because if you want to be a disciple of Christ, Jesus says, if you want to be my disciple, you got to take up your cross every single day and come follow me. The only way that that's going to happen is if we have a hope and a joy that's set before us that's powerful enough to sustain us in the midst of a world that is profoundly, profoundly dark. It goes back to the Revelation thing. I was like, he's speaking to churches that are actively under persecution. And the comfort that you would expect would be, oh, things aren't actually that bad. But I think about the fifth seal. In Revelation, you get the first four, which are the four horsemen of the apocalypse, and then in the fifth, you see the martyrs under the altar, and they cry out to God. They're like, "When will you avenge us on the inhabitants of the earth?" And God's response is, "Here, I'm going to give you these white robes. Also, more of you still have to die." Like, that's not the comfort that we expect. Yep. And yet, what the Lord is telling us is like, no, like, as long as you live this life, you are going to live a life of the cross. But the joy that I'm setting before you is going to equip you to be able to walk that day by day. So don't close your eyes. Don't close your eyes to that pain, because it's part of what your experience is going to be. But understand that I am going to be with you through that, because I endured the cross. I'm going to be with you through it, to literally right next to me. So this goes back to my favorite verse in the entire Bible, which is Revelation 3:21. When Jesus says to the church at Laodicea, "To the one who overcomes, I will give to them the right to sit with me on my throne, just as I overcame and sat with my Father on his throne," which is the most insane thing I've ever read in my entire life. Because you might think that the end is like, is like Christ and the saints get like little thrones around him, and that's awesome. But that's not what he says. He says, the very chair on which me and the Father sit, you are going to be up there too. It's a big chair. We all get to share it. but that when that becomes the overarching image of your life, and then the Lord calls you to go through some suffering, you're like, okay, cool. Like, because if this is where we're going, whatever it takes to get there, let's do it. And so then you can see the darkness of the world with clear eyes, but understand that the light not only is coming, but is already poking through.
I think that theological excursion he just took us through is a snapshot of the black church when we think about on a plantation, kind of like these plantation prophets, of being able to use art in a way that laments, but it talks about this great hope.
Yep.
And you think about people who are considered to, they're existing in fear, they're existing in death, but yet there's a hope that is communicated that the world didn't give and the world can't take away.
Oh.
And to me, that is a wonderful example of how the Christian is to. That's not an anomaly. Like that is the call.
Yeah.
Like we
This
see
is
that.
normal.
It's like, that's fantastic, but it's not fantastic.
Yeah.
That should be the normal.
This is everybody should know this.
condition.
This is how we should all
Exactly.
be operating.
Exist. And so I think that's the reason why I love art so much, is because art gives us the ability to use that as a vehicle to demonstrate a hope that sometimes is so foreign to our natural kind of disposition.
No, this is great. You guys, thanks for helping the audience get some different questions. I want you guys to give a one-sentence answer to the last question. Okay. I know it's going to be hard. So let's assume the audience is asking something like, all right, I like to be a builder or a contributor to good culture in my corner of the empire that I sit in, but I don't want in my heart. What's the first thing you tell them to do? Where do they start?
Bad culture is a violation of the relationships that God established in Genesis. So to work towards good culture is to work towards the harmony and flourishing of those relationships. Relationship with God, relationship with ourselves, others, and the land.
Love that.
One of the primary elements of culture is economy, and the most important thing for the Christian to do economically is to share. That it's the primary act of also resistance against an economy that encourages you to hoard.
And it's the primary nature of the Trinitarian God.
It's who
Right.
God is.
Well, guys, thank you so much for sharing a short conversation with us on the Faith and Work podcast. Seriously, really appreciate your time, and it's awesome. Thanks for the questions. Well, it was really an awesome conversation with Malcolm and Sho, and I hope that you'll be thinking about it for a while. I will be as well. And you may recognize that you don't agree, you don't land in the same place as Sho and Malcolm on every point, and that's totally fine. We are here to learn from one another, from our experiences, from our questions, from the way that we understand God's story of Scripture and what He's doing currently in our world. And the questions they're asking, they're worth sitting with, regardless of your agreement with them. Imagine if the church actually did become known, though, not just for how we engage culture and try to show a better way, but for actually what we make, what we create through our everyday work, for the beauty it produces, the communities it sustains, the economic dignity it pursues and protects. To me, that's a pretty compelling vision for our daily work. So start with some new questions. Go back and listen to my conversation with J.R. Briggs on becoming a better question asker, which is to say you can become a questionable worker. And then take those questions and consider what Malcolm and Sho have challenged us with. And if you do, I think you'll learn a lot and you'll grow. Thanks for listening in, as always, to the Faith and Work podcast. We hope you'll give us a review, like us on the platforms where you listen, and share this conversation or others with some of your friends.
If you've enjoyed this episode of the Faith and Work podcast, please subscribe, leave a review, or share it with a friend. The Faith and Work podcast is produced by Denver Institute. We believe that when Christians work faithfully, the world will taste the hope and life that Jesus provides. To learn more or to make a financial contribution, visit denverinstitute.org.